Hey there, if you've been scrolling through TikTok these days, you've certainly run into that trending sensation. Beautiful German-descended girls, tall, blonde, light-eyed, donning traditional dirndls, a beer mug in hand. You might feel like you've stepped right into Munich, but no, this is Brazil. And beyond these stunning, ample-bosomed blondes and abundant draft beer, there's something far greater. An entire slice of Germany nestled within our tropical rainforest. It's a story that blends tradition, festivity, controversy, World War II repression, and even a swastika discovered in a pool that caused a stir back in 2014. Is it a party? Is it tradition? Or is it a German theme park, stuck in the middle of nowhere? What I'm about to tell you will leave you shocked, and you'll want to watch until the very end. 1. Calling it a piece of Germany in Brazil might sound like an exaggeration, but there really is a little corner of Germany right there, on Brazilian soil. Yes, it's real. Just drive a few hours in Santa Catarina, and you'll come face to face with cities that look like they were teleported straight from Bavaria. Blumenau, for instance, is famously known as Brazil's beer capital. The city beautifully blends modern skyscrapers with charming half-timbered houses, those classic German structures of wood and exposed brick, creating a fairy tale-like scene, yet uniquely set amidst palm trees and a tropical rainforest. It's a mix that makes no sense at all, and that's precisely why it's so fascinating. And then there's Pomerode, a city so German that many people still speak Low German, a dialect you won't even find spoken with such prevalence in Germany today. There, it feels like you've stepped through a portal, signs in German, traditional food, bars with Germanic names, and even festivals that could be happening in Munich. But hold on, it's not all parties and cold beer. Behind this charming scene of houses with flower boxes and a European atmosphere lies a far weightier history, filled with tradition, forced migration, repression, and even controversy. And that's exactly where it gets interesting. 2. Hermann Blumenau and the settlement in the wilderness. It all started in 1850 with a fellow named Hermann Blumenau. This guy was a young German pharmacist who decided to leave everything behind in the Duchy of Brunswick to pursue a crazy idea, to found a German colony in the middle of the Brazilian rainforest. Now think about it. In the middle of the 19th century, while Europe was facing famine, political crisis, and misery, Brazil was offering cheap, fertile land to anyone willing to settle the interior. For the Brazilian government, it was great. More people settled and produced. For Germans, it was a chance to escape Europe's chaos. A win-win, right? But it wasn't quite that simple, as just arriving here was truly a test of survival. The ship journeys stretched for weeks, confined to packed holds, devoid of ventilation, where diseases like cholera and typhoid fever spread unchecked. If you managed to survive the passage, then congratulations. Your prize was to cross kilometers of dense jungle, swamps, and land with no roads at all, until you found the place where you would start your new life. Kind of like those survival reality shows, but for real. There are letters from colonists of that era detailing personal tragedies. Entire families lost children during the journey. Imagine burying a child in the middle of the woods and still having to keep walking, because giving up wasn't an option. That was the level of sacrifice it took to build what we now call Blumenau. The first 17 settlers arrived with Hermann and began to build wooden cabins. Piece by piece, they turned that piece of wilderness into a small village, which later grew into a city. And here's the irony. The pharmacist who envisioned this settlement eventually gave his name to the city, Blumenau. It really doesn't get more German than that. But hold on, just because they survived the jungle doesn't mean life got easy. Quite the contrary, keeping this German culture alive in the midst of Brazil would lead to even bigger problems in the future. Thirdly, a cultural identity that endured and survived. The most curious thing is that even after so much hardship along the way, the German identity not only survived, but also grew deep roots in Brazil. In Blumenau and Pomerode, You can still hear people speaking German dialects that have already disappeared from Germany itself. It's surreal. You travel 6,200 miles, cross the ocean, arrive in central Santa Catarina, and discover that a more archaic form of German is still spoken there than what Germans themselves use today. There are expressions that sound as if they've been plucked from a 19th century diary. And the most amusing detail? The Brazilian descendants of Germans here speak this way quite naturally, whereas in present-day Germany, these very words have evolved into linguistic museum pieces. It's like coming to Brazil and running into someone speaking archaic Portuguese, like something out of a classic novel. And it's not just the language. The architecture, the customs, and even the way they organize parties and social clubs remained practically untouched for decades. It's as if they froze a piece of Bavaria in time. But there's an important detail. While it may seem quaint and touristy today, it wasn't always like this. Because when World War II broke out, this connection to Germany became a huge problem in Brazil. And that's when German culture in Brazil went from being a tradition to a target of persecution. Want to know how? The story gets heavy now. 4. World War II and its aftermath. If, until now, the narrative appeared to be merely an immigration story, the tone markedly shifts in the 1940s. When the world was plunged into the Second World War, being of German descent in Brazil ceased to be a cultural curiosity and instead became a significant problem. In 1942, President Getulio Vargas declared war against Nazi Germany. Consequently, communities such as Blumenau and Pomerode were suddenly viewed with suspicion. This resulted in a period of heavy repression. German schools were closed, radios were confiscated, and speaking the language in public practically became a crime. Imagine, you're born in Brazil, growing up in a family speaking only German at home, knowing no other reality. Then abruptly, the government tells you your language is illegal. Children were forbidden from using the language, even during school recess. Teachers lost their jobs. Anyone who insisted on speaking German could be arrested, beaten, or even accused of espionage. It was a brutal shock. What was once community pride became shame and fear. Many changed their first and last names to appear less German. Others hid, speaking the language only at home, in secret. And it's precisely this period that clarifies why today there's a feeling of a frozen culture in the German cities of the South, because for decades it was repressed, forbidden, and only survived as families carefully guarded it like a treasure within their homes. But if they were silenced during the war, revenge came later, and German culture returned with cold beer, beautiful women, and South America's biggest Oktoberfest. Now tell me, isn't that curious? In Brazil, speaking German was almost a crime, but now everyone flocks to Oktoberfest, Bavarian hats on, taking selfies with a liter of draft beer. That's just Brazil. In fact, here's an idea. Share this video with that friend who's a bit tanned and absolutely loves blondes and cold beer. It goes like this. Brother, forget about Eastern Europe. The paradise for blondes is right here in the south of Brazil. Number 5. Oktoberfest in Blumenau. After the dark period of suppression, German culture not only endured but truly burst forth in celebration. If one event defines Blumenau, it's Oktoberfest. To give you an idea, it's considered the largest Oktoberfest in Latin America and is second only to Munich in the number of visitors. Now, don't get the idea that it's a perfect replica of the German version. Things are quite different here in Brazil. While in Munich you have those organized tents, reserved tables, and everyone sitting around singing traditional songs, in Blumenau it's more Brazilian. There's more dancing, more mixed music, and you don't have to just stand still with a beer mug in your hand. You can walk around, sing along, even dance forró with a German accent if you want. And of course, the beer is the star of the show. Blumenau markets itself as Brazil's beer capital, which is rather amusing given that a country recognized for its returnable bottled draft beer and beach-enjoyed Skol now prides itself on having a city proudly labeled Tropical Bavaria. The prevailing sense of security is another notable distinction. Many tourists mention that inside Oktoberfest, the festivities actually feel more tranquil than in major Brazilian cities. It is not the sort of venue where you constantly need to clutch your cell phone as if it were a precious gem. It really feels like a piece of Germany, just louder, and with people dancing all the way to the floor. But if the party is good and the beer is cold, does the food also manage to uphold German tradition? 6. German gastronomy in Brazil. If there's one thing you can't separate from German culture, it's the food. And Blumenau and Pomerode take that seriously. You'll discover a bit of everything here: spätzle, goulash, savory pork knuckle, tangy sauerkraut, pretzels, and naturally, an endless array of sausages. It's as though someone attempted to prepare a classic Munich menu, but had to improvise with ingredients found in Brazil. And that is precisely where the intriguing aspect arises. German tourists find the experience cool, but they almost always let out a, "It's good, but not the same." The sauerkraut, for example, tends to be drier. Sometimes the pretzel arrives so limp it looks like it went through the Brazilian national team before getting to the table. The spätzle with goulash has that homemade taste, but it's served with Brazilian chives and parsley, because around here, everyone loves to garnish their dishes. The irony is that many Brazilians visit these restaurants and come away enchanted, believing they are experiencing truly authentic German cuisine. Meanwhile, genuine Germans eat, make a face as if it's almost perfect, and would rather order feijoada the following day. In the end, the truth is that these adaptations aren't flaws, but living proof of cultural fusion. Because that's what tradition really is. You take what came from abroad, mix it with what you have at home, and create something new. If Blumenau feels like a tropical Germany, Pomerode surpasses it. It's called the most German city in Brazil. But does this title live up to the hype? That's what you're about to see. 7. Pomerode, truly the most German city in all of Brazil. If Blumenau already seems like a little piece of Germany stuck in the forest, Pomerode is like the hardcore version. The city prides itself on being the most German in Brazil, and that's not just cheap marketing. Up until recently, 90% of the population spoke German at home. Today, that number has dropped, but it's still about half the city. And it's not modern German either. It's Low German, a dialect that has all but disappeared even in Germany. Here, you enter a small bar, order a beer, and the waiter replies in fluent German without ever having been to Europe. It's like a movie scene. You travel to Brazil, but then find yourself needing to use danke and bitte just to be understood. Walking through the streets, the feeling is strange. German signs, restaurants with Germanic names, and even residents who seem to communicate more in dialect than in Portuguese. It's as if Pomerode made a pact. Here, we simply do not mix. Brazil's out there. And there's the curious aspect. Many young people in the region see the language not just as a tradition, but as an opportunity. Speaking German truly opens doors at the region's giant companies, as many German multinationals are headquartered there. So, contrary to what many people think, it's not just about grandmother's traditions, it's also a career strategy. But the question that lingers is, to what extent is this identity a source of cultural pride, and at what point does it risk becoming isolation? Because, let's be honest, it's a bit surreal to be in Brazil, order a draft beer, and get scolded by the waiter in German because I mispronounced the name. However, in 2014, Pomerode garnered international headlines for an entirely non-touristic reason: a swastika found at the bottom of a pool. And that's when the story gained a new significance. 8. The pool swastika controversy. Pomerode's reputation as the most German city in Brazil was already well established. Until in 2014, a bizarre incident threw the city into the international spotlight. And it wasn't for its Oktoberfest or its German architecture. It was because of an aerial photo released by a civil police pilot. The image, captured between Rio dos Cedros and Pomerode, showed the bottom of a private swimming pool with a large swastika emblazoned on its tiles. Yes, in the middle of Brazil, in the 21st century. The controversy exploded. The swastika stands as one of the most weighty symbols in modern history, directly associated with Nazism. And in Brazil, there's a specific law that punishes with 2 to 5 years in prison those who fabricate, sell, or disseminate Nazi symbols for propaganda purposes. But the question is, how far does law interpretation go? Delegate Luiz Grus, who was in charge of the case, stated that there was no crime. His argument was that for it to be considered an apology for Nazism, there needed to be dissemination and a clear intention to exalt the symbol. Since the design was located within a private property and completely unrelated to extremist groups, it was considered to be merely a personal expression. Nevertheless, the delegate stated the swastika had existed there for more than 13 years, having already been noted in prior surveys. And get this, the owner of the house was a history professor who had never engaged in Nazi propaganda. The problem is that interpretation varies based on who's analyzing it: the delegate, prosecutor, or judge. Public prosecutor João Marques Brandão Neto then brought up an episode in Blumenau when Nazi materials were discovered inside a resident's house. As the content was hidden, not publicized, the case was ultimately dismissed. To illustrate the difference, Grus mentioned another case in Itajaí, Santa Catarina, where posters with Hitler's image were put up on city poles in 2014. In that case, it was clear that there was an externalization, a public exposure with propaganda intent. That constituted a crime. Even so, the photo of the pool was sent to the State Directorate of Criminal Investigations, DEIC, and the director, Lorito Akira Sato, ordered the Pomerode Police Department to proceed with the case. In other words, it didn't just end with, "It's not a crime." And amidst all this, the city was swamped with headlines: Germans in Brazil and swastikas in the backyard. The episode sparked a troubling question. How far does preservation go?